incorporated in the year 2008, the Kenya Electricity Transmission Company's role is to ensure there is reliable and quality supply of electricity throughout the country. Almost 11 years down the line, what has KETRACO achieved? Tonight on the Inside Government, we're joined by Fernandes Barasa. He's the CEO of KETRACO. He's going to explain to us some of the achievements and challenges they're facing and how they plan to go about it. Thank you so very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Very good. So next year you're celebrating your 11th birthday. Should we smile when we look back at your achievement, or should we call for help?
Definitely we need to smile because since we were incorporated basically 10 years ago, we've had some significant achievements with regards to stability and quality of power. So far we have brought on board 2,300 kilometers of high voltage transmission lines. And of course, just to mention a few, the last one which we energized last year was Loyangalani-Suswa transmission line. It's a 435 kilometer transmission line evacuating 310 megawatts of power from Lake Turkana wind. Now this wind energy coming on board, by the way, we realized a saving of almost 8.5 billion Kenya shillings on FCC, that is fuel cost charge, by replacing some of the expensive thermals. So you can clearly see the multiplier effects on having renewable energy on board. We also brought on board Mombasa-Nairobi, that is in 2017, our longest line for 82 kilometers. We are able now to move geothermal power all the way from Olkaria up to Mombasa. So what I can say is we have realized some significant improvement in terms of stability of power, even within Nairobi, by the way. So far, we've not had any instances in Nairobi of national blackouts. And this is because of KETRACO.
When you talk to Kenya Power, you know, they'll tell you that they're still having challenges with system losses. And last year, they reported system losses of about 22%, which was actually an increase from 20% they reported in 2017. And when you ask them why, they say that it's because our transmission infrastructure is still, number one, outdated, and number two, incomplete. Would you agree with them?
Now, when you look at the system losses, first we have commercial losses, and of course the technical losses. Now, looking at the 22% you are talking about, largely those are commercial losses. But for the distribution lines, of course, you also have the system losses, which is almost making now the bills to be very expensive. On the transmission side, the transmission losses at the moment, we have managed to reduce from 3% to almost 2%. Now, what happens on the transmission losses is the more the voltage, the lower the losses, because whatever that is generated is delivered almost 100%. For now, we are delivering almost 98% because of investing in high voltage transmission lines. For example, when you have 132 kilovolts, 220 kilovolts, and 400, that reduces the transmission losses because of the distance. So one thing I can tell you is when you go to the numbers right now, having brought on board 400 kilovolts of Mombasa-Nairobi, having brought on board 400 kilovolts of Suswa-Isinya, having brought on board the 400 kilovolts of Loyangalani-Suswa, the transmission losses have significantly reduced. And that is why the capacity of those high voltage lines, we are talking about an average of between 1,200 megawatts of power, almost up to 2,000 megawatts of power. So we are better off with high voltage lines as opposed to many small distribution lines of 66 kilovolts.
The global average system loss is about 11%. Do we have a target in this country?
Well, what I know, I may not really talk about the distribution losses, but of course, matters transmission, I'm confident to talk about it. Our target, of course, is to go below 2%, which is something I can say is globally
in the transmission.
In the transmission. And that is something that we are progressively doing. Even some of the lines we are bringing on board, by the way, So far, we are having another 400 kilovolts line from a 300 kilometer, that is from Olkaria, Lesos up to Kisumu. When these lines come on board, they'll strengthen the transmission network. And once the transmission network is strengthened, then of course we have a reduction in the transmission losses. Yeah.
What percentage of the transmission infrastructure is yet to be modernized?
Well, looking at the historical perspective, maybe we can just pick it from before we came on board, we had 3,300 kilometers of transmission. That is on 208s. From 1965, thereabout to 208, that's almost 40 something years. We had 3,300 kilometers. So far, for the last 10 years, we have been able to bring on board 2,300 kilometers. That's basically almost 70%. Now, what we target by 2030, we'll be having almost 15,000 kilometers of transmission lines. Currently, what is running by end of next year, we'll be having 2,500 kilometers. So you can clearly see the trajectory is quite significant. And we also are trying to mark it with the potential of generation so that you don't put up a line going to nowhere. So there is what we call the least cost power development plan, where anywhere we're having a generation project, then we mark it out and also have a transmission line. So it goes, I can say, in tandem with what is happening on generation side.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. One of the issues that manufacturers have raised, especially the Kenya Association of Manufacturers, is the execution of infrastructure projects, yeah, especially within the energy sector. And assigning ourselves specifically to KETRACO, they have raised issues with the delays in the implementation and completion of transmission lines. Do you agree with them?
Well, of course, we have some specific cases where we have had delays, but overall, I can say we have done very well, because some of the projects which had delayed, we have had a program, I can say, pragmatic solution of them. There's only one project so far, or rather two projects which have delayed because of issues to do with contractual challenges. But on average, I can say we have done very well, looking at the portfolio of delivered vis-a-vis the ones that have delayed. Yeah.
And if you had to go through the General Auditor's report for 2018, one of the issues that was flagged off was the issue of delayed project. And according to the Auditor's report, the total project portfolio was about 24 billion shillings that were delayed. So far, number one, do you agree with that report? And number two, if yes, where are we in terms of execution?
Now, of course, when you look at the auditor's report, basically, I can say it's not an offsite audit. So I agree with the report, because when we have that report, ideally it is based on observations of what is going on in terms of projects under implementation. Of course, the projects we are talking about so far, we have Lesos Sororo project, that is a transmission line connecting Kenya and Uganda, where the contractor, of course, went bankrupt, and that is why that project has delayed and they went to court. So I know matters in court, we never discuss them a lot, but that is a reality, that we went to court to challenge the injunctive orders. So I may not want to talk so much about matters in court, but that is a reality, where, of course, contractors run to court after termination events. When you look at the other project, is this one of Tackle Rutum Kitale, the substation, because the transmission line is almost complete. That is all the way to Tackle from Ortum. But the substation that is in Ortum, of course, had to delay because, again, of an act of a bankruptcy of a contractor. So what we have done as we speak right now, we are now in a very advanced stage of getting another contractor, basically to finish the balance of works. And we expect in the next 12 months we should be able to be up and running that Room substation. But by and large, of course, most of the challenges that we have had in the past is because of wayleave issues. But so far, I can say the government has done very well, even by coming up with a new legislation on the wayleave compensation. So that will give us a lot of work fronts available for construction. Yeah.
You know, when those two companies, you know, faced financial or cash flow challenges, you know, leading to bankruptcy, you know, the questions that came or arose was proper due diligence or financial due diligence done on these two companies by KETRACO?
Well, when you look at, let's take an example of Inabenza, that is a company in Spain. This company, we brought them on board, that was in 2013. At that point in time, of course, there was proper due diligence. Of course, Spain had just come from economic recession at that point in time. But in Abenza, we did proper due diligence. We even got a no objection from the financier, that was African Development Bank. And what now led them to the bankruptcy event is because of investment. You know, when you're looking at the due diligence, for example, financial reports, you may not have a direct control on the future investments of some of these companies. So if a company goes into overdrive, investing in offshore projects, and then they become bankrupt, I can say that is an event that you may not predict today. For example, if you come and do a due diligence with KETRACO, we are solid. But what will happen in the next 5 years, you may not really have control. So in terms of the technical and financial capacity, I can assure you those companies were solid. GOT, for example, this is a company from India. They were implementing projects across the region. When you go to Uganda, they were being technically and financially okay. That's why they were getting projects even in Uganda, by the way. GOT is also in Rwanda. So somehow along the line, I think, as I said, because of maybe their future expansion program, just to digress, who knew that Nakumat will not, you remember? So I'm just saying some of the investments, expansion programs which those companies were doing maybe is what affected their cash flow issues. But in terms of proper due diligence, I can assure it was done, and the team that went to do it was properly constituted.
Let's, for example, pick the case of GOT. And, you know, the company embarked on a serious and aggressive expansion drive. And they ended up, you know, getting so much business and investing in so much. And the auditors started raising queries back in the year 2012. About the feasibility of some of the projects they were undertaking. And we all know the cock came home to roost. Were some of these issues, you know, factored in when they were being given contract?
Actually, what I can say, for example, GOT, when you look at the due diligence that was done, first of all, the project that they were given, the first project was in 2014. By the way, these 400 kilovolts, Susway Senior, they're the ones who delivered. And that was delivered in 2017. Fair enough. But in 2016, that's now when the project we are talking about was given to them, because they had also demonstrated ability and capacity. And also when you do due diligence even across your peers within the East African region, they were doing very well. So GOT, I can assure you, the due diligence which was done, for them to get the 400 kV line in 2014 was spot on, and they delivered that line. At the time they were getting now the other projects, they'd done almost 70%. Again, the criteria that had been given by the bank, of course, they had met. Because any contractor who is doing a project The bank, African Development Bank, is very serious on how have you delivered, what percentage of works have you delivered on an existing project. So that one they met. That's what I'm telling you. Now the future, like now the investments they were doing after the contract had already been given to them. Of course, you cannot have now control, for example, what they were investing in after 2016, 2017, and 2018. By the way, GOT in 2013, 2014, they were doing very well, financially, technically, even within the region.
Yeah. No, Timothy, I mean, of course, project delays, leads to cost overruns, and because of price fluctuations and inflation. In a situation whereby a company fails to deliver a project on time and there are delays, who caters or who swallows the difference in terms of our pricing?
Now, first and foremost, when you look at these contracts, when you sign a contract, for example, with a contractor, the price, we always even factor in a price index in the contract, so that after, for example, if this project was to be delivered in 36 months, the price will not change. Now, when it comes to extensions, for example, we extend without prejudice. What that means is every party bears their own costs. And most of the costs involved here are usually, for example, if they have guarantees they have taken from financial institutions, so they bear their costs. Now, in the event of a termination, one of the things that we do, number one, is to go, besides the advance payment guarantees or performance guarantees, we also have a provision on calling on the liquidated damages. So we have tried to make sure that when you are signing these contracts, we are very pragmatic, so that any events that are caused by the contractor, definitely we have them to bear the cost. Now, of course, most often than not, we have also tried to make sure that when we are having discussions, even at the time of termination, and some of the costs have been incurred because of the event of delay caused by the contractor, again, we have, when you're doing now the set of accounts, we also bring in some of the counterclaims against those contractors. So those are some of the things that we have been doing, of course, on the current cases that we have.
Yeah. When you look at the portfolio of the projects that are either currently ongoing, proposed, or completed, you have a beautiful array of transmission system that is geared towards ensuring there is total connectivity, not only in Kenya but also in the region. But in the past, you have decried, low budget allocation, to execute your project. Has the situation improved?
Well, one thing I can assure you, at the moment, we don't have any challenges on budget, because first and foremost, with regards to external funding, in fact, we have too much. And one thing
too much money.
Yes, external. There are so many DFIs, by the way. There are so many DFIs who are coming up, knocking on the doors of National Treasury to finance transmission projects. And that's why I want, on the onset, to agree with the executive order of the President to slow down on uptake of new projects so that we can focus on the ongoing projects. That was a good step in the right direction. Number two, with regard to counterpart funding, again, the funding we have received this year, basically because of reducing the uptake of new projects. So now any counterpart funding is now properly given, of course, at the right time, as and when is required, because we also have to recognize the collections are also done sequentially. So we have cash plans we have done on quarterly basis, and the monies are released as and when is required. So we don't have any funding issues at the moment.
It is true. I mean, we know that the government has put in place, some austerity measures, on new projects and even old projects. But I want to hear from you. When you look at the pool of projects that are that you're supposed to undertake, from connecting to the southern, the Southern Africa power pool, to the East African power pool, to Ethiopia, are there projects which you feel are being impacted by the austerity measures?
Well, when you look at the austerity measures, by the way, they haven't really affected development projects. Largely, reading the supplementary budget and the circular that was issued last month, what the National Treasury is trying to do is to cut down on any wastages, issues around traveling, issues around training, so that at least some of that money can now be channeled to go and support the Big Four. So the austerity measures, one thing that I can assure you, especially for KETRACO and most of the projects within the energy sector, they did not affect all the development plans, especially whatever that we had requested to be given from Exchequer. That one was not affected because the focus on the ongoing project is for them to be completed. And that is how the Big Four agenda will be achieved. So I can say is the National Treasury, when they were coming up with that circular on austerity measures, largely I can assure you it is been focusing largely on recurrent expenditure as opposed to development expenditure. Yeah.
The Ethiopia line is now complete.
Almost complete.
Almost complete.
Yes.
You say 95%?
95%. We expect it to be done by April next year.
By April next year?
Yes.
So that's about 6 months from now?
Thereabout, yes.
Have we agreed on the wheeling charges?
Yeah, of course. From the onset, we have our power purchase agreement that was signed between Kenya Power and our counterparts in Ethiopia. Of course, to import 400 megawatts of power at 7 shillings per kilowatt hour. And of course, that is just for importing. But the essence of the interconnector is for regional power trade. For example, since this interconnector is terminating in Suswa, using our oil carrier Suswa line, we can still export geothermal power to Ethiopia. We can still export wind power because again it terminates in Suswa. And this line, of course, again starts from Suswa all the way to Ethiopia. So the interconnector will be both for importing and exporting power. But for now, we have a PPA that was signed. Yeah.
For 7, you say?
7 shillings per kilowatt hour.
Per kilowatt
that is
hour.
like 7 US cents. Yes.
I mean, it goes without saying that, there's a lot of investment that has been done to ensure that the cost of energy in Kenya is suppressed.
Yeah.
And we have come from a high of 21 shillings per kilowatt hour to about 11 shillings that manufacturers are paying now. From where you stand or sit, what else do we need to do to ensure that the cost of energy comes down to around 5, 7, or 8? If we were to compare, if we were to compete favorably with countries like South Africa and Egypt.
Yeah, one thing I know is the government is very pragmatic in terms of reducing the cost of power by investing a lot in renewable energy. Because when you look at the applicable tariffs, wind, we're talking about 8 shillings per kilowatt hour. That is for winds, right? Geothermal, we are talking about an average of 6 shillings per kilowatt hour. Hydro, of course, is 5. So when you look at all the renewable energy sources, largely the average tariff is less than 10 shillings per kilowatt hour. So it goes without saying that we need now to invest more in renewable energy. And that is why the government has that, of course, national electrification strategy of going renewable or green energy by 2022, 100%. So for me, that will be one of the strategic directions of pushing this tariff down, because the more you bring renewable energy on board, of course, you now reduce the thermal consumption. So there is no shortcut about it.
There's no shortcut about it. Tell me this, I mean, what will it take this country to ensure that each house is connected to the national grid?
Now, one of the strategies, of course, number one is to make sure that the national grid, that is KETRACO, is everywhere. And what we are doing at the moment is to make sure that out of these 47 counties, at least we have presence in every county, either through a T-line or a high voltage substation. Because you cannot connect households or increase electricity access without having the infrastructure. So the first thing is to have the infrastructure, and that is basically what we're doing. One of the lines we are doing by the category of 132 kilovolts, they're basically going to areas where we don't have the national grid, and this will facilitate expansion. So once we have now targeted all those counties and have the infrastructure by having the 132 kV lines, then now the connections will become a reality, because you also don't want to have connections and then the stability of power is compromised. So with a strong infrastructure, with a strong national grid, then now it will make sense now to connect as many Kenyans as possible. And of course, right now from the numbers, we are doing almost 70%, and I'm sure Kenya Power will achieve the 100% electrification, because we're also pragmatically adding more transmission lines on board to make sure that the stability of the network is achieved.
Very good. Now that you have touched on the issue of vandalism, tell me this, between the issue of acquisition of way leaves, vandalism, and project delays, which would you say is the biggest challenge facing your business?
Now, of course, our biggest challenge has been wayleaf, because wayleaf access, I can tell you, like Mombasa Nairobi was delayed by almost 3 years because of wayleaf issues from 2010 up to 2017. Vandalism is a challenge, especially when we also have a delay in energizing the line. But in terms of ranking, I can say wayleaf issues are ranked number 1. Then, of course, vandalism becomes the second issue, because by and large, when the line is vandalized before energization, definitely increases the cost and also the time of completion. Yeah.
As we come to the end of this interview, I want to hear from you. You know, of course, there are projects that are currently ongoing, like the Nairobi Ring project, like the Autumn line. Are you working within a certain time frame to ensure that these projects are delivered?
Yeah, in fact, just to break down in terms of the ongoing projects, Nairobi Ring, we have so far 3 substations. We have a senior substation at 220 kilowatts. As we speak right now, we are having what we call cold commissioning going on. It is 99% complete. At the River substation, again at 220 kilowatts. As we speak right now, we are having commissioning tests. Again, in the next 1 month or so, that substation will be energized. We have another substation, which so far we have done almost 30% in Nairobi East, a place called Mala. That substation, in the next 10 months, it will be done. So we are talking about, let's say by mid next year, Mala substation will be completed. Within the same Nairobi Ring, we have Kimuka substation. Again, as we speak right now, we are done almost 70%. By March next year, it will be done. Come to Olkaria Lesos Kisumu, one of our flagship projects this year, is a 400 kilowatts. So far, we have done almost 75%. By April next year, we expect geothermal power now to go all the way to the western region. So that's basically another 10 months or so. Of course, Tackle Ortum Kitale, the transmission line will be done by December. Then, of course, as I said, the substation will quickly come in. But of course, in Takwel, we already have a substation. So what we'll be doing is an extension of whatever is existing. Ethiopia, Kenya, of course, will be done by April next year. And that's why the 2,500 kilometers by December 2020 is still achievable. And we are very much on course. Of course, in Kajiado, recently we opened up the interconnector, that is Kenya-Tanzania. It's ongoing. By July next year it will be done. At the same time, there's a 132 kilovolts line, that is Suswa, that is Isinya Namanga. Again, in the next 12 months it will be done. So quite a number of the ongoing projects, I'm very confident. Then of course we have also Sondu Homa Bay, which is another line that will be done in the next 8 months.
Very well. Yeah. Anything else you want to add?
Well, besides what we are doing for the lines, of course, we have also diversified into fiber because we want to optimize our transmission infrastructure. All our transmission lines have a fiber cable. So right now we have signed a partnership with the Liquid Telecom, basically to light the fiber, and this will be another revenue stream for KETRACO.
Good.
So we're just telling Kenyans to support KETRACO in terms of land acquisition, so that you don't have project delays.
Very well.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Fernandes, thank you so much for gracing our show tonight.
Yeah, thank you very much.
All right. Asante-san.
All right.
Fernandes Barasa is the CEO of Kenya Electricity Transmission Company, joining us here on Inside Government to talk about transmission of power, of course, other issues. You have listened to him, and this has been Inside Government. My name is O'Brien Kimani. We do this again on Thursday, same time right here on KBC Channel 1. Until then, we'll see you. Bye for now.